Chingy, shall we start?
You may start, sir.
I think I can start. Is there other people that's not on the Zoom that can hear us?
Sir, it's only these three, but you can start and just go through the important stuff.
Okay. What I would like to tell the students, and I'm going to repeat it again. I realized that a lot of students miss the mathematical skills to derive a straight line function, either a demand or a supply curve. So those that you have a textbook, I would like you to go to page 23. Either on the book or on your ebook, page 23, the equation of a straight line function. Okay, because it comes on the quiz questions as well as in the assignment questions, and students battle with that. Just to get that a bit of revision. I know it's about grade 10 work, but just to understand that again, that bit of mathematics, because in the appendix of the first chapter are all the maths that you need. So if you battle in the quiz questions as well as in the other questions on equations, then go back to that appendix at the end of page 1. Oh, sorry, chapter 1. So on page 23, there's a simple equation of a straight line function. Now this is a positive function. You can see from the slope, it's a positive function. Remember, when we work with demand curves, it's a negative function. If you work with supply curve, it is a positive function. Now look at that figure 1a, 1 on page 23. It is a graph of an equation of a straight line function, right? You have on a vertical axis, you have B, and that is dollars per month income. And a horizontal axis, you have F, that's minutes per month. In our case, if it is a supply curve, we would have a price on a vertical axis and quantity on a negative axis. Sorry, on a horizontal axis. So that's where they get the 5, right? And then plus, the reason why it's plus, it's due to the fact that it's a positive slope, right? And then you get the slope of the line, right? Now you can see the slope of the line between 10 and 30 will give us exactly the slope of the line is the change on the horizontal axis divided by, the change in the horizontal axis divided by a change in the vertical axis. And in this stage, it is, of course, it is 0.10. It's 10. It's the axis of the line. So in our case, and then you put on the T. In our case, if we're going to write a demand curve, the equation of the demand curve, just see what we ask. If we said write the demand curve in terms of quantity, then quantity is always on the horizontal line, right? Then the demand curve, you will say Q equals, and then you get the intercept on the horizontal line, right? And then minus, then the slope of the line, price. If we ask you to write it in terms of price, you will say price equals, and then you get the intercept of the demand curve on the vertical axis, on the price axis, is equal again to the slope times quantity. So make sure you make sure two things. Number one, when you have to write the equation in terms of what? Do you have to write it in terms of the vertical or a horizontal axis, right? And 2, the slope of the line. That's important. And of course, the slope of the line might either be minus or plus, right? If it is a negative relationship, it's always a minus, like in a demand curve. Or if it's positive, then it is, of course, a positive slope, a plus in terms of a supply curve. So in most times, we ask the demand curve to be right in terms of price. Then it's always price equals to the intercept on the price line minus the slope of the line times Q. If we ask to write it in terms of quantity, then it is Q equals the horizontal axis intercept, right? Where it intersects the Q line. Because the slope still stays minus, the value of the slope stays the same, it may be 0.2, 0.3, etc., right? Plus then, the slope of the line P for price, right? So make sure that you understand how to write a equation, because it's been asked a lot of times, right? We use it when we calculate elasticity. We use it when we calculate demand curves. We use it in problems. You will see in assignment 2, I'm going to give you a demand curve in terms of quantity, and then you have to calculate price. You have to be able to calculate elasticity, and you have to be able to calculate the various quantity demand at various prices. Okay. Next week we will concentrate again on this, because next week we're going to tackle chapters 3 and 4, especially 4 on elasticity. Right. Now, all of you have to remember in your reading list that you have to read through. You have to read for this week chapters 1, 2, and 3. But the quiz will only be on chapters 1 and 2. Each one will get their random questions based on chapters 1 and 2 for this week. Right. Now, remember, the first 2 chapters, which the quiz is about, is all about the various definitions and principles that we use in economics. And I just want to again repeat those principles. Right. The first one is the cost benefit one on page 5. Right. The cost benefit principle is that any economic decision maker always in any action will compare his cost towards its benefit. And remember, the cost includes also all other extra costs, your implicit cost as well. Right? It's not only the price of a product that you as a consumer buy, it's the effort to buy that product as well. It may be transport cost, it may be time, it may be any other thing. So that's why bank tellers, people, became so popular. Because in previous time, I remember when I was a full-time student, on a Saturday morning, the bank was only open from 9 o'clock in the morning till 12 o'clock. So between 9 and 12, you had to queue. You have to stand in the queue. And you have to draw enough cash for the weekend. Right? So if you're a student and you want to go to a RAC or any other student activity over the week, you'll have to draw enough cash. And it led to a lot of implicit cost for students, etc. So that you had to stand in the queue. So the moment they brought up automatic tellers or bank tellers where you can draw money over all the time, it became cheaper. Number 2, the banks also like people rather to use bank tellers because they have to employ less people. It's less paperwork. It is quicker, and of course, then it helps them to ask a bit higher banking cost. But the consumer is willing to pay a bit of more of banking cost because of the benefit of time, the benefit of queuing, the benefit of availability. So in other words, when you talk about cost and benefit, all actions, people use their cost and they compare it with the benefit. So a lot of times people will tell you, look, I'm not going to that sale in town, at Macro, for instance, because two things, it's the time, and three, it is the effort to buy a product, right? In most cases, when those products are normal goods or inferior goods, people won't take that effort to go and buy those products. But when it becomes luxury products, like I told you, motor cars at Black Friday, television sets, etc., people are willing, right, to endure a huge effort, time, transport cost, etc., to get hold of that product, because there again, the benefit of the sale is higher than the extra cost of time, transport, effort, etc. Right, so that's the cost-benefit principle, and it's been discussed on page 3 to page 5. Right, out of the cost-benefit concept, of course, we get opportunity cost. Opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is basically the practical way in which people measure cost-benefit. Right, it's basically that. In other words, again, if you want to go and buy a television set, a new television set on a sale, you look at the other opportunity that you've forgone. In other words, you have to get in a bus, you have to get in a taxi, you have to get a lift somewhere, and you have to get a delivering of that television, which will cost you extra, and you compare that with the opportunity cost, for instance, to go that day to a movie. Now, if the movie's opportunity cost is again getting a television on a sale. So in other words, the action of each of your actions you compare with an opportunity that you forgone. That's the second main principle for economic decision makers. And we're going to apply that right through to the firm. We're going to apply it, on the demand side. We're going to apply it where we talk about marginal utility and utility that you derive out of each action. We're going to apply it to the firm. We're going to talk about cost, its marginal cost, its profit maximization position. Then with our next meeting, week 3, we're going to apply it to the macroeconomic side, to government policy, to the measurement of GDP, etc. So opportunity cost is a very unique principle that we use in economics right throughout, right? And then, of course, the marginal concepts. You'll have to understand marginal cost, marginal benefit. There's no economic module, graduate, undergraduate, throughout the world that you will take in microeconomics that doesn't explain the concept of marginal cost and marginal benefit. Right. For instance, the Dow Jones share price on Wednesday took a big dip. Right? Why? Because the US long-term bond rate for the first time went above 3%. It means it cost more to borrow money. And not only for a government, but also for private individuals and private businesses. So immediately, analysts reckon the fact that lending cost in the US is now picking up, it means that the Federal Reserve will start to increase interest rates. That would put pressure on the extra profits that firms will earn in the next 6 months. What happened with share prices? It came down. Not because a bank like Merrill Lynch came out with fantastic sales and earnings of the company on Wednesday, the same day, but the price of the share didn't increase. The price of the share dropped. Why? Because analysts say that the expected new marginal, the next change in the profit will be negative. So marginal cost and marginal benefit are the other two principles that's very important as we go through through this whole course. That's why on page 11, there is an example of that launches of marginal cost with the number of launches. So you must always be able, on the table, total cost to calculate the extra cost or then the average cost. But important, always marginal. It is the extra cost with an extra effort, with an extra production. So marginal cost, marginal revenue, very important aspects of the introduction to economics. Right. Then the last thing I want to concentrate on chapter 1 is micro and macroeconomics. Right? Because microeconomics is the study of the individual. On page 13, they will tell us. It's the study of the individual under trying to solve his scarcity problem. Where macroeconomics is the study of the total economy, the national economy, and policies of the government to do exactly the same. That the total economy, that the total country increase its welfare and address the scarcity problem. So in both cases, micro and macroeconomics is the study of how do we solve the scarcity problem. Right, the problem that we have now in South Africa is how do we get this economy growing? Because we will not create enough jobs if we get this economy not growing. And that is the problem. If we're not going to solve that scarcity by using our resources better, the economy will not grow, people's welfare will start to come down, and we will not be able to create jobs. So that is the scarcity problem for the whole country as a whole. So the biggest problem now is what the government going to do with economic policy? How are they going to interfere in the economy to make sure that we have a better economic growth rate so that we can use our resources better? Right, we can start by maybe having free education for poorer people, tertiary education. So we brought in that everyone can study free if the parents earn less than 350,000 rands a year. The idea is to increase, of course, the skills. That is maybe one reason how we can solve the scarcity problem in South Africa. The fact that there's a skills mismatch. Right. So that is basically chapter 1. And of course, all this effort of all the decision makers in the economy, the government, businesses, household, and the trade of the rest of the world is about an incentive. You will only make a choice to go and buy that television 20 kilometers away cheaper if there's an incentive. You will only start a new business if you have an incentive to make a profit. It doesn't help that you have 100,000 rand, you invest it in a business, and after a year you say, wow, I made a very nice profit of 2%. Right. That is 4,000 rand on my 100,000. You could have taken your money, you could have put it in a bank, and you could get after tax 5%. So that is the incentive. The incentive above the other principles, very important. Now that's basically chapter 1. So if you look at a summary, please people, always look at the summary and the core principles. It will help you a lot in answering your quiz. Right? So the summary, definitely look at those principles that we've studied. Right? What is economics? That the chapter focus on rational behavior or the cost-benefit principle. Then also the chapter using the cost-benefit principle to demonstrate that people act rationally and that people looking at opportunity cost, and that you have not to ignore your implicit cost, the cost that you cannot put in rands and cents. And then also marginal benefit, marginal cost, and what is microeconomics and macroeconomics. Now, is there any questions on chapter 1? Okay. Then also, people, don't forget to look at some of the problems at the back of the question, of the book, right? Because some of your quiz questions will come from that. Your assignment on chapter 4, I'll definitely look at some of those review questions at the back of the chapter, but we'll come to that. So that's chapter 1. Very important again, the appendix on page 22. The appendix, equations, graphs, and tables, because we're going to make the whole time use of equations, graphs, and tables. So this is what Singi told you when we have the introduction to this module, is that it is analytics. You must be able to evaluate graphs, you must be able to set tables, and you must be able to write down equations and understand it. So if you're not very sharp in mathematics, or you haven't done it for a while, please go through that appendix, because this is going to help you a lot. So that's basically chapter 1, right? Now chapter 2, we say, right, after we've done the basic concepts of the economic decision makers, we start with comparative advantage. Again, the principle of comparative advantage is that people will always look at that action or do the action that he or she can do better than someone else. So the economic decision makers, either the government, either the rest of the world, either the households or the businesses, will always tend to specialize in that actions that they can do better. That's why if you look at the learning objectives, the beginning of chapter 2, it says that you have to explain and apply this principle. And then also you have to explain and apply the principle of increasing opportunity cost. So as you do more and more and more of activity, your opportunity cost becomes higher and higher and higher. Just like I say, if you are thirsty, you say, right, I rather now drink a Coke. I'm thirsty, but I'm not that hungry. I rather now buy a Coke. When I buy my second Coke, my utility of drinking something gets lower, the marginal utility. In other words, I'm not that thirsty anymore, but I'm starting to get hungry. So rather of buying the second Coke, I will buy a hamburger. So that is the principle of increasing opportunity cost. Because if I drink the second or a third cost, my opportunity cost of buying something to eat starts to rise. Then I might choose not to drink a second Coke, but rather to buy a hamburger. So that is the principle of increasing opportunity cost. That's the so-called low-hanging fruit. First, you can see in that picture, there are some oranges that is low hanging, and it explains opportunity cost, right? Then, of course, from the opportunity cost, one can draw a production possibility. But before we come to that, I want to jump to page 37, where we have the definition of comparative advantage as well as an example, right? So the principle of comparative advantage is that everyone does best when each person or each country concentrate on activities for which his or her opportunity cost is the lowest, right? So remember, this was the example that we had in class of Pat and Megan and the productivity of program and the website and the productivity in bicycle repairs, where we could compare the two and we can get an absolute advantage and a comparative advantage, right? So comparative advantage and absolute advantages is explained on page, from page 25 up to page 35 up to page 39, right? Now, once we understand comparative advantage, we can draw a production possibility curve, right? Production possibility curve is very important. So in other words, he can either do he or she can either do a web transaction, or she can repair a bicycle, right? Or she can do a combination. He or she can do a combination of the two. So your production possibility frontier is the first one on page 40, Susan's production possibility, right? Now you can see from this that Susan can do coffee better than nuts per day. She can produce 24 units of coffee and only 12 units of nuts. Or, of course, she can produce a combination of the two. Right. Now, in most cases today, when you go to interview of a job, people say, all right, maybe you have the academic qualifications, but what other skills do you have? And that other skills determines your production possibility frontier. Because the more skills you can do, the more to the right-hand side will be your production possibility frontier. And today, employers are looking on how the skills of workers are above their training, above their education, above their qualification, right? And that normally will help you if you have more skills than only the academic work, so that you have a high production possibility. Origin of the graph is lower in value than production possibility curves further away. It may have the same slope, but it depends on how productive the person is. It may be that Susan will go and have a training course on how to work harder or how to work more efficient, and then she can produce 30 units of coffee and 15 units of nuts. So her production possibility curve will be more to the right. So in the same time, she can produce more. So that's very important. And then, of course, the slope of the line is if she decides to produce coffee, how much of nuts will she forgone? In other words, that's the opportunity cost. So that's why they say on page 41, the slope of the line in terms of coffee is the loss in nuts over the gain in coffee. So this is a principle that you have to understand. Then you have to understand that there are certain points on the graph of opportunity cost. And that is figure 2.2. This specific worker cannot produce 16 units of coffee and 8 units of nuts per day because it's outside the possibility curve. So that's an unattainable point. And then there's another point: if she produces 8 coffee pounds per day and only 4 nuts of pounds per day, it's combination E, then she's either lazy or she's not productive. So that is another point, point E. It is attainable, but it is not the optimum point. Now, this one we'll have to understand as we go along, right? Now, if you look at figure 2.3, there's Tom's production possibility curve. Again, people, if I ask you to write down the equation of that line, right? It depends on what I ask. I say, if you write it in terms of coffee, right, then your equation will be C for coffee equals to 12, the intercept on the vertical axis, the coffee, right, minus, right, of course, a half, 24 divided by 12, right, minus a half nuts, right. If I ask you to write it in terms of nuts, then nuts N will be equal to 24, right, minus, because negative slope, 2C. Because now the slope is the other way around. It's 24 divided by 12. Right, so make sure you're able to write down the equation. Right. Now, what's very important, if we have 2 people, like Susan and Tom, right? So Susan is at a steeper curve. She can produce more coffee, right? Tom's production possibility frontier is more flat. He can produce more nuts, right? And I told you, Nos, fortunately they did do in the textbook, if you connect the 24 of Susan and the 24 of Tom, so in other words, Tom is going to specialize, he's only going to produce nuts, he can produce 24, and Susan can produce, she's only going to specialize in coffee, she will produce coffee 24 per day, and if they trade 1 for 1, it will be on a higher production possibility curve and their welfare will be higher. And that is how trade is taking place between two countries. Right? The US is far better in production of soybean than China. China doesn't have the soil, it doesn't have the land, it doesn't have the temperature and etc. And not the water maybe to produce soybean, but they are very good, of course, in cell phones. So if they trade with each other, and China is fully specialized in a smartphone, and the US in soybeans, and they trade with each other, then the countries will be better off. Now we know today that countries and people don't fully specialize, right? In the US you also will get some cell phones, you get Apple. And you also will see that in some regions in China, they are starting to produce corn and soybeans. But the US are still more superior in soybeans, and we know that Samsung and some of the other products from China, smartphones, are cheaper than Apple, but they will trade with each other. So that is that's the principle of competitive advantage. So on page 45, the moment we start to work with a person cost, but in real life, I'm back again. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Shingy, I'm back again. Can you?
Yes, I can hear you, sir. I'm not sure if everyone else.
I was just disconnected. I've got a very low connection here. It's now strong again. Okay, I want students to look on page 47. There is the principle of increasing opportunity cost, or so-called low-hanging fruit cost. Right. Low-hanging cost, like I told you, for something like grapes, it's easier to harvest. Right. So it is easy to pick. But of course, some soil you cannot have low-hanging fruit. You have to have other techniques. And it doesn't make it so easy to pick, and it becomes more expensive. So as you use more and more of the same product, right, the opportunity cost starts to increase. And that's why we have a outbounded curve of an opportunity cost for a large economy where you don't have only one person or one product and due to increasing opportunity cost. All right. Now, what will shift an opportunity cost? And that is on page 48, figure 2.7. Right. It is basically when productivity of your inputs increase. So if your productivity of all your inputs increase by 10% for both the products, nuts and coffee, we will have a neutral increase in opportunity cost. And the whole thing will shift outwards, right? And it will lead to higher economic growth. Right, so what the economy can do, the economy can, by applying its resources, produce more in equal terms of all the products. Now, that normally doesn't work like that, where we have a neutral increase in the production possibility curve. Normally, you will get that people start to specialize more, and your technology may be in terms of the nuts. And then your curve will be skewed from coffee towards nuts. And that curve, I think I draw it somewhere, but I don't draw it. But it can be that your production of coffee stays exactly the same. So in the coffee industry, there's no specialization and no increase in productivity. Then it will stay on the left-hand side, where the red curve starts. But the increase in productivity is in the nut sector, right? And then it will start from the very first coffee, and a combination of the two, it will lie above, but it will lie skew above. You haven't got an example of such a curve in your book, but that is when there is a higher increase in technology and productivity in the coffee and nothing in the nuts, right? Now, the problem today is that countries are slowly. South Africa, we can't even produce our own 100% motor car all over the years. We are producing motor cars, but we only, in most cases, only assemble it, right? We assemble it. If you take the BMW 3 Series, that we're now going to produce in just outside Pretoria, we're going to produce the BMW 3 Series, the X3 Series, the SUV, for the total world market, right? But it's not our product. It's not being engineered in South Africa. It's a German product. We're only going to assemble it, and we're only going to use 45% local content. The rest are all imported. Now the question is, why have some countries so slowly tend to specialize? Well, that depends on the country's resources. It depends on the skills of the laborers. It depends on economic policy. It depends on a lot of things, right? So what happens in a lot of other countries, people tend to specialize on a higher level, and they can produce things quicker and cheaper. So that is basically on page 49. And then on page 55, they talk about comparative advantage and international trade, right? So that's basically the chapter, people. So in chapter 1, we talk about our concepts, the concepts of opportunity cost, micro, macro, marginal cost, marginal utility, and the marginal benefit and the cost benefit principles. In chapter 2, we only looked at comparative advantage. So for this very first week, it's not a lot of work, right? So please concentrate, go through it, and see if you cannot do very good in this test, right? Now, this is where I would like to stop. If there's any questions, I would gladly like to take. If not, then Shingi, we'll hope the students can go through this work. And I think next week's discussion would be far more interesting, far more important, because then we're going to look at demand curves, supply curves, and the elasticity of the curve.
All right, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, Shingi.
Thank you.
I just want to repeat again. Remember, I told them that the course will only be on chapters 1 and 2.
All right. Thank you, sir. I think I've
Okay, so you note that, please. Okay, thank you. Hey, see you guys next week.
All right.